Greetings, I'm Will Rivinus, and I'm about to show you part of my collection of models, which I have collected and built over the last 30 odd years. The total collection is about 125 or more models. This set is only about Americana, viewed all over the United States, usually as souvenirs of trips that I've taken. Last year, I did a session on cathedrals, churches, and temples, and sent it to a few friends. When last I checked, there were 140 views of that show, so I am at substantial pressure to create another show for this year on Americana. Let's start with the Santa Maria, the flagship of Christopher Columbus in 1492. He had two other ships that were commissioned by Ferdinand and Isabella of Spain at that time. And this ship was 62 feet long and 18 feet wide. 62 feet is just 2 feet longer than a rowing shell. A rowing shell has 8 oarsmen and 1 coxswain. This ship had 40 men on it, and so they could not sleep in berths or hammocks, and they could not even sit down to dinner. They had to eat standing up and somehow live through that transatlantic voyage to come to America, where they probably landed in Haiti. It was an awesome trip and the beginning of our history of America. This is the Fairbanks House in Dedham, Massachusetts, said to have been built in 1637, and by their own humble claim, the oldest wooden frame house still standing in America. Notice the 4-postered bed, the high-back chair, the chests. Here's mom supervising a daughter, and here is the court cupboard, as they were called. And this is the Moon Williamson Log House, which is located in Falsington, Bucks County, Pennsylvania. It's down near Bristol. It is from the 17th century and is one of a number of log houses that I know of, or parts of houses that I still see on the roads around Bucks County. It's quite fascinating that they're still alive and in existence. Also in Bucks County is Pennsbury Manor. This, of course, is only the main house of the manor. It would have had outbuildings, barns, etc. But this is located down along the Delaware River. It was built to William Penn's designs in 1699 and 1701. Unfortunately, Penn never got to enjoy it because he was forced to return to London, where he died in 1718. So he never got to enjoy it. The facade is in brick and faces inland. To the distance in back is the Delaware River. And notice that the brick was all imported from London, whereas the other side of the building actually is in clapboard, and that was built locally. This was the hangout for Penn's family later and the Indians along the Delaware River. This is a rather complex cutting about a painting by Edward Hicks, who lived from 1790 to 1849. Hicks was a Quaker painter in Newtown, Pennsylvania, and in theory, Quakers shouldn't be painting pictures, but Hicks did this essential scene of from the quotation from Isaiah, that the lion will lie down with the lamb and the child will play above the adder's den. And so, in a sense, this is quite fascinating out of the Bible, but it's also the work of the Quaker painter who did about 50 copies of this over and over, and that was the source of his living. And here we have Monticello, the home of Thomas Jefferson. It was also a manor estate where he lived in the main house and had dependencies for his office and for kitchens. There were lots of other buildings and plant areas around here. It was a gorgeous location, Monte Hill, Cello, beautiful, and indeed it was. I would like to say that it had a date, but the only date we can use legitimately is 1813, when Jefferson died, because he was fiddling with the design and rebuilding and changing every year during his residency there. It's a lovely property and beautiful setting. This is a generic Pennsylvania Dutch farm scene, complete with the residence on this side and the front porch entrance, a well house or spring house, a tenant property, a shed for equipment, and a stone bank barn. The bank being the horses and wagons went up in here to unload the hay. It's a marvelous stone building, similar to what had been here at Lindencroft years and years ago before the fire. And here is obviously the Pennsylvania Dutch symbolism on the outside of the barn. It's a wonderful decoration, and then interior access to the stables underneath. And now for a little contrast, here is a round barn, a shaker barn in Hancock, Massachusetts. These barns were a little bit more work to build, but they were more efficient. The cows would come in here and go around facing in, and therefore you could milk a lot more animals at one time than in a traditional rectangular barn. Also, if you brought the wagon in here with the load of hay, you could distribute it all the way around more easily and still turn the wagon and the horses back out of the building without having to unhitch in the other buildings. These are kind of interesting. There are said to have been round barns on Washington and Jefferson's properties in the early 18th century. And as late as the 1890s, a festival barn was erected in Salisbury Township, just about 5 miles from where I live. This is a model of the Lowell Mill in Lowell, Massachusetts, on, I believe, the Merrimack River. This model actually is much smaller than the actual mill, which used to process cotton bales from the south and woolen from the countryside around there. Notice that the model at least shows the river coming through, driving the wheels inside the mill, which stretched across here. This was in lieu of an elevator for bringing goods in the top and down. Then over here was the worker housing, of course, with the general store in the front and obviously outhouses in back of the mill. A model of a cotton bale that might have come up from the south to be turned into yarn and then fabric until the blockade of the southern states in the beginning of the Civil War. Here is an early American seaport. It's generic, but the model came from Mystic, Connecticut, and it has all the key features. Here's the ship's yard and the life-saving station, the clam house, the public house, the houses for the residents in back. Here's the main tavern, and this was the sail loft. It was fun to see all the different parts, and it too has its outhouse in back. And here is the U.S. Capitol, which everyone recognizes as of January 6, 2021. The main rotunda is in the center. The house meets on the left-hand side as you look at it, and the Senate meets on the right-hand side. This is a jigsaw puzzle, so it was a little different type of challenge to try and put it together. It was started as a building in 1703 with $500 contributed by Thomas Jefferson. And you may recall from the Broadway show Hamilton that they decided on the Potomac in the song, "This is the room where it happened." There are a variety of architects involved. Pierre L'Enfant designed the surroundings of the Capitol and the position of the Capitol. William Thornton was also responsible for designing, along with Henry Latrobe and others at various times, because of course this rotunda was designed after the main building was constructed. It is a fabulous place to visit in its own right, and so I recommend it from personal experience. The next two models are minor mysteries. I remember building them. I know that I had a great time finding and creating the model, but I forgot to put the origin of it on. So for all intents and purposes, this is a New England house on the shore, maybe in a private enclave with a captain's tower up above to look out. It is charming, clapboard side, and lovely porches on each side, but I do not know for sure where it took place. This is another charming treasure from probably New England coast. It probably has clapboard sides, which was a style very popular along the coast. And the part that I love is that it still has a hammock here on the side. But I can't remember where I found it. This is certainly recognizable to everyone. The original statue was designed and built in France by Frederick Auguste Bertoli in 1875 as a gift to the people of America in tribute to the 100th anniversary of their independence. The interior structure is of iron built by uh, Eiffel, who of course built the Eiffel Tower. And marvelously, the model was built the same way as the original. So if you are very clever, you turn her upside down and you can see in here the iron structure that was built and then the copper that was mounted on the outside afterwards. The whole statue arrived from France in 1875 in 350 pieces in 200 cases. Needless to say, the people of New York were upset because they had to assemble it and put it on an island somewhere. And it took them 10 years to raise the money and get organized to actually erect the Statue of Liberty. But there it has remained on Bedloe's Island ever since. This is Ellis Island. As a model, it came as a postcard, so it's a little bit smaller in operation here. Ellis Island operated from 1892 to 1924 and processed probably around 12 million people who came into the harbor of New York, saw the Statue of Liberty, and then had to be processed through Ellis Island. It had a bad fire in 1897, which sadly destroyed many of the records, but it is still a monument and a fascinating place to visit. And this is the Empire State Building, one of New York's most popular destinations, but it was built in 1931, the highest building in all America, and for that matter, all the world. It is still fully operating at 32nd Street on 5th Avenue. We've seen important monuments of New York above ground, so here is a taste of the subway system below ground. These are models of railway cars from 1903 to 1963. Strangely enough, they're all preserved over in Brooklyn, where there is a Metropolitan Transit Museum that will happily show you anything that you remember about your life in the subway in Manhattan. This is the famous Roby House in Chicago, Illinois, an example of Frank Lloyd Wright building in the prairie style. It's a fascinating building, but rather uncomfortable from the views of the furniture inside. I cheated and added a few modern cars here that were actually models that appeared as bind-ins to the New Yorker a few years back. So it adds a little activity to the lovely house. And going farther to the west, here is the Wheeler Opera House that was famous for melodramas that were presented in Aspen, Colorado, starting in the year 1889. It was a charming concept to play with, and the artwork is by Red Grooms. This is another generic out of the 1890s when merry-go-rounds were popular. Have some of the animals wander around in front of you. And if you would like to ride in one of these, you better not go to Coney Island where they've been destroyed, but there is one in Peddler's Village, Lahaska, about 5 miles from where I live. And it still operates every day for the children of all ages. 1967, the Needle was built in Seattle, Washington, as part of the World's Fair. It's a magnificent building, and we can see a little bit more of the gallery restaurant on top if I bring the restaurant down to earth. And it is a rotating restaurant with a magnificent view of all Seattle. We started with the ship, the Santa Maria of Columbus, and we're ending with the ship. This is the Henry. Actually, I didn't build it. This was built by a friend of a friend. It is a Chesapeake Bay skipjack. Very broad of beam, fairly long, very, very shallow draft, used to harvest oysters on the Chesapeake Bay. A charming boat with a long, colorful history. Some of them are now converted into pleasure craft that are kind of fun. And that is the show. This is a collection that I put together, Will Rivinus. The photography is by Dickie Ann Bowl Johnson, and the sequencing is by Betsy Rivinus Denny, my daughter, who put it together in the final form. So I hope you enjoy the show.